Fine. Okay, today we will discuss, this is the 7th class of the philosophy seminar, and we're going to discuss the concepts of fate and free will. What is the relationship between our efforts in life and so-called fate? On the one hand, it seems that we are able in some way to affect our destiny because we make efforts, and sometimes those efforts are fruitful. Quite frequently, the results that we have is in proportion to the effort that we make. And so we could say that we have free will to create the reality we want to create. On the other hand, however, we see that there are times in which other forces intervene, and the events are not exactly as we would like them to be, or the results. And that some events seem to happen as if they are destined from some other power rather than our will, our desire, or our need. So what is the relationship between our effort in life and those seemingly destined or fated events? Now, I'm going to give you a number of models or concepts which may help us approach understanding this seemingly conflicting ideas. No model, however, will be totally perfect. And perhaps the answer to this question, that is, the relationship between fate and free will, probably lies beyond the perception of our mind, beyond our capability of understanding in terms of time and space. But I'm going to give you some ideas which may help. Now, in one way, we could say that the relationship is like a card game, a game of cards. And that is that the cards that we receive, that we are dealt, is fate. So we are dealt with certain parents, a certain kind of body when we are born, whether it's male or female, whether it's healthy or not so healthy, strong or weak, a certain economic situation we are born into a certain psychological state in the family. And so these are the cards that we are given, are dealt by the life itself. What we do with those cards, however, is our free will. So 2 people or 15 people could be all dealt a certain physical weakness, for example, with the digestive system or the nervous system. And each of those people living in a different way, one person performing exercises, eating properly, doing relaxation, meditation, will have a different outcome than another person who just doesn't bother to observe any of his ways of living and worsens that situation. So any situation given to us will have the effect not only of the situation, but of what we do in response to that. So in one way, we can see fate as the cards we are given by life, and free will, what we do with those cards, how we handle them, whether we learn through that and how we react. Another way of understanding this relationship between fate and free will is to realize that life is a school and that we are souls in the process of learning, and that in school, for example, when you're in the 1st grade, the 2nd grade, or level, however you call it, you have very few choices. You need to learn specific lessons. And so you are not given any free will. The child, until about 12 years old or later, is not asked what he wants to learn. He must learn these specific things. As the child grows, however, then he is asked to make a choice. Do you want to go into humanities? Do you want to go into science? Do you want to go into arts? How do you want to evolve? How do you want to develop yourself? So we could imagine that the same may be happening in terms of our soul evolution, that in the beginning, an immature soul, a young soul, may have to go through very standard life experiences, so that through those life experiences, this soul gets the stimuli it needs in order to learn. And that after a period of time, the soul may start making choices as to what kind of lessons the soul would like to go through. Now, because the soul has chosen a certain lesson before incarnating, doesn't mean that the soul remembers that lesson once it's incarnated, and it doesn't mean that it definitely will learn that lesson. Because often we see things as happening as totally unjust and as having nothing to do with what we should have in our lives. We become hurt, we feel angry, and we don't use these experiences which life gives us for the possibility of learning. We have forgotten that we have chosen this lesson. In which case, this lesson is not fate, but this lesson is what we have chosen to learn. So when we talk about fate, it's important to understand that we are, at least in my perception, I'm not imagining that there is chance in the creation of my fate, nor am I imagining that there is some divine being which is deciding my fate. I think we discussed this last week. I believe that I create my own fate and my own free will by my previous actions, thoughts, and words, by my present belief system, my present emotional state, and by the lessons I have chose to learn. So although it seems to be an event coming from life, totally independent from me, I, on a spiritual level and on a mental level, have created this event. So it's not a fate separate from my own choices in life. But then I have, except for that, besides the fact that I have created this fate by my previous actions and by my lessons I have chosen to learn, I still have the free will to react to that fate, to react to that event which is happening in one way or the other. And then I'm creating a new reality for the future, because the present is the result of the past, and the future then is the result of the past plus the present, because the present is the past of the future. So every choice I make, every time I react in a certain way, I am creating a new kind of future. Another example which might help us is the example of a car moving with some momentum towards a wall. This car has momentum, which means direction and a mass and a velocity. We could say that the car is the physical body, that the engine is the emotional body, that the steering wheel is the mind, and that the driver is the higher intellect, and that the owner, who's sitting in the back seat, is the soul. So because the driver is pretty much asleep, that is, the higher intellect is not functioning, is not awakened yet, the car is a car moving without a driver. And so what would a car do if it was moving without a driver? It would follow the course of the least resistance. It would go downhill. It would just follow its senses, follow its needs, follow its desires. And that's how we are living our lives. We are completely controlled by our needs, our desires, our habits, because there is no higher intellect which takes a hold of the mind and can steer it away from that. Not that they are evil, but simply our happiness may not be there. What is truly beneficial for us may be other than what satisfies us temporarily, such as smoking or eating too much, or drinking, or anything which may be a temporary pleasure, but in the long run may harm my health and my happiness. So, we could say that all of my choices in the past, which have created my habits and my desires and my needs, are leading me to a certain fate. They're leading me to a certain result. I mean, I am in a way programmed, and I will create illness, I will create divorce, I will create success, I will create unhappiness. That is, my programming is leading me in a certain direction. So this is fate. Fate is the result of my programmed functioning. However, if I can get a hold of the steering wheel and change the direction that the car is going, I can avoid this fate. So, although there is a great momentum towards this fate, toward this fated event, I have the power, if I obtain clarity to see where this way of life, this way of eating, this way of thinking, this way of behaving is leading me, and if I can make a change in that, I can change the direction of this car and not hit this particular wall or go into another direction. So another way to understand the relationship between fate and free will is that the fated events are the result of the way we think, act, eat, behave in life, and that if we change them, we can change our reality. Another way of understanding this relationship would be a dog or a goat tied to a pole with a rope. Now, this dog or goat has a limited amount of freedom. The longer the rope, the greater the freedom. The shorter the rope, the less the freedom. So there is the amount of freedom that this being has to do with the length of the rope. So if we associate the length of this rope with our, if you like, our causal account, that is, with the karmas that we have brought with us in this life and that we are creating in this life, the more egotistically I have functioned in my previous lives and in this life, the shorter the rope, the more the specific the events that I must go through. Whereas when I have functioned selflessly and creating less karma, limiting karma, then the rope is longer, so I have a greater degree of freedom. So another way to understand this is that there is a certain amount of freedom which depends on the karma which I bring into this lifetime. Another way of understanding it is like a bank account. When I continually make deposits in my bank account, then that gives me a certain amount of freedom because I have in there enough money to do things that I would like to do. When I make withdrawals continuously from my bank account, at some point my account is negative, it's in the red, and I have no freedom to do anything. So our freedom, our free will, the amount of freedom that we have, perhaps is not only a relationship of the development of discrimination, as we already mentioned, and the development of willpower, but also the state of my cosmic bank account. That is, the state of how many selfish acts I have in relationship to how many selfless acts. So the more selfishly I function in life, the more karma I create, and the less freedom I have.